The Snowbound Shepherd, Chapter 1, The Storm and the Saddle. The sky bruised over the ridgeline just after noon. What had begun as a dusting of frost turned thick and blinding in the space of minutes. Snow swirled sideways across the trail, erasing the path ahead and behind. Reverend Eli Harper leaned low over his mare's neck, whispering soft encouragement through cracked lips already turning numb. "Not far now, girl," he said, though he had no earthly idea where they were anymore. His long coat, once a gift from a congregation in Letcher County, had stiffened with ice along the seams. The cold seemed to come from the bones of the mountains themselves. Old, deep cold, not the kind you escape with a fire and a prayer. He had set out from Birchfield 3 days earlier, bound for a schoolhouse revival near Laurel Creek. The circuit had been his calling for 3 years. Moving from town to town, chapel to barn, with only his saddlebag Bible and a hunger to preach wherever 2 or more were gathered. But lately, the hunger had waned. The word still lived in him, yes, but something felt hollow, as if he was speaking to rooms already emptied of hope. He had asked the Lord for renewal, for direction. He hadn't expected the answer to come in a blizzard. The mare stumbled, cried out, and Eli slid from the saddle just in time to catch her before she fell. Her leg was favoring, likely pulled on the ice. He looked around, snow, trees, nothing more. No smoke, no light. He was lost in the white. Then, just as his knees began to sink, he saw it. A thin thread of gray smoke curling above a far pine brake. He blinked to be sure it wasn't a trick of the storm. Hope flickered. He tugged the reins gently, leading the lame mare through the thickening drifts. By the time he reached the town tucked deep in the mountain fold, he was more ice than man. But something in him stirred, not fear, not relief exactly, something quieter, as though he'd crossed a threshold. He would later say it felt like stepping out of time. He would later say he arrived at Whisper Hollow, not by accident, but by providence. Chapter 2. Whisper Hollow. Whisper Hollow was not on any map Eli carried, nor mentioned by any of the circuit deacons he'd ever ridden with. It appeared like a memory someone had tried to forget, nestled in a low fold of mountain with steep crags to the north and thick pine woods everywhere else. He counted maybe 30 homes, all wood-planked and weather-beaten, scattered along a narrow creek that ran like a vein through the hollow. Smoke rose in slow spirals from a few chimneys, no roads, just paths and footbridges, horses and sleds, and silence. The town lived up to its name. The first person to see him was a boy, barefoot despite the snow, carrying a bundle of sticks. He froze in place and stared. No words, just wide, watchful eyes. "I mean no harm," Eli called softly, lifting his hand in peace. The boy took off running. A minute later, 3 men emerged from behind a woodshed, armed with rifles and coats that hadn't seen a tailor in 20 winters. One of them, older, gray at the temples with shoulders broad as the doorway he filled, stepped forward. "You're far from where you ought to be, stranger," the man said, not unkindly but firmly. Eli nodded. "Got turned in the storm. Horses hurt. I'm a preacher. My name's Eli Harper." The man studied him for a long beat, then he lowered his rifle. "I'm Silas Corbin. This here's Whisper Hollow. Don't get many folk passing through." He glanced at the injured mare. "We got room in the smithy. Bring her this way." They housed the mare in the warm barn behind the forge. A small crowd had gathered by the time Silas led Eli toward a cabin with smoke curling from its crooked chimney. Eli noted the way the townsfolk kept their distance. Their eyes weren't hostile but wary, like folk who'd been burned before. The cabin was small but clean. Wood floors, thick quilts, and the smell of something hearty in the pot. "She'll be along shortly," Silas said. "She?" "Mara, my niece. She's the one with healing hands." Eli nodded and let the heat settle over his bones. He sat by the fire and peeled off his gloves. His fingers were white, nearly numb. He bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I asked you to show me where to go. I didn't know you'd answer in snow." The door opened, and a woman stepped in, carrying a basket and wearing a wool shawl over strong shoulders. Her hair was dark, pinned up, and her eyes, when they met his, were clear and cautious. "You're the preacher," she said flatly. "I am. I don't care much for sermons, but I'll tend your hands." He smiled faintly. "That seems fair." She knelt beside him and began unwrapping his frostbitten fingers, gentle but without fuss. "Name's Mara." "Eli." She nodded once. "You're not gonna like it here," he chuckled. "Maybe that's why I'm here."